Hi friends, this is Caitlin. Welcome back. Today we're going to be making a super sweet Halloween card featuring the Whimsy Stamps Halloween Night stamp set. I love these little witches. They're so cute. And of course, I'm pairing them up with my Tim Holtz moon masks. So I'm going to show you with these three sizes how I picked. I do have 2 packs worth of these masks tucked into one package. So just keep that in mind that if there looks like there's extra here, it's because there are. But I really wanted a moon that was going to fit and be visible around that witch and the bat. So I picked, I believe, the largest size. And I'm using my Wendy Vecchi mini make art station. I like to take a piece of printer paper and magnet that down, kind of folding over that top edge so that if I get ink around, I don't have to worry about cleaning it up. I'm sure it would just wipe right off, but I find that I also get less slippage when I am working on top of a printer paper kind of base. So I'm going in, starting out with my Seedless Preserves oxide ink, and I'm going to create just a lighter purple halo around the moon, and then we're going to go in with a Villainous Potion to deepen up all of the edges and kind of fill in that sky. I'm just working in kind of small circles, building up that color. I've been loving my Distress Oxide inks for my night skies lately. I think it's just fun to be able to layer the inks a little bit more. They do have a little bit of opacity to them, so they do layer, and versus the regular Distress inks, once you go dark, that's it. Like there's no coming back from that. Where these, you can kind of play with the colors back and forth, which I really enjoy. This card was just a because card, right? Like I just had this stamp set. I saw it and ordered it myself from their website. I love it. It's so adorable. And I just wanted to create. Sometimes I create cards with like a specific technique in mind to share with you guys, or a new product release or something like that. This card was just for the joy of making a card. And I really love how it turned out. So the final step for my ink blending on my sky was, of course, to bring in some black soot and darken up all of those edges, really rounding out those top 2 corners. I think this really just helps to take it from, like a purple background to an actual night sky feeling. And you can obviously swap out your blues for purples, but for a Halloween effect, I love the purple. So I decided to add some water splatters to this just to start breaking up some of that texture. I like to kind of fan my paper a little bit to make sure that I get really clear kind of droplet shapes, letting the water kind of react with the ink. And then I took some of my Dr. P.H. Martin's No Bleed White, and added just a tiny bit of water to it, and I'm going in with a fan brush and creating a ton of stars just by tapping on my brush. Then I removed my mask and set this to the side to dry. Multiple times this past October Eve season, I didn't let those stars dry, and I ended up smearing them. So now I know I get my sky ready, I set it to the side to dry, and then I jump over to working on my images, and then I can always come back and finish my moon. So that's what we're going to do here. Instead of rushing, I'm just set it to the side for a minute, and we're going to go in with our Copic markers and start shading in all of our images. So I stamped out that main little witch with the bat that I was inspired by in the beginning, and I also stamped out this extra little bonus bat who is so stinking cute. And I'm going to color the bats very similarly, the same color scheme. We're going in with cool grays, starting with our C9, then jumping up to C7. I really wanted to make sure that these looked really dark and black. And because my sky was purple, I decided to focus on leaving these like a cool gray, true black. Sometimes I will make them with like E70s and make them like a softer kind of taupey brown. But again, for a more true like Halloween feel and to let that purple sky really shine on its own, I thought keeping these more neutral was a good idea. So I'm blending out all of those colors. I went in with C5 and then C3 as my highlight shade, making sure that I'm still leaving enough light on the face that you kind of can catch his little expression. I brought in some pink on the ears and the cheeks just to keep them really cutesy, right? Like this is a Halloween card, but this is definitely not a spooky card. It's definitely like a more whimsical, cute card. And so I think little touches like blush and the pink in the ears really help to kind of push that cute factor, which just makes my heart so happy. So the same idea for this bat, but because he's sideways, instead of doing a very centered highlight, I am making all of the highlight come on the right hand side and the shadows more on the left hand side. Using the same colors, I'm just going in and kind of creating that shadow in depth. In theory, the shadows wouldn't be there, right? Like the light would be coming from the other direction, but I really wanted to kind of emphasize the way that these two are looking at each other. And so I just made the artistic decision to put my shadows on the outside for both of them, and the centers where they're looking at each other is where that light is coming from. Technically they'd be backlit, but we're just going to ignore all of that. Sometimes when it comes to card making, I like to be really mindful about that, and sometimes I like to just make my own decision and run with it. As long as you stick with it, whatever decision you make, I think it always turns out beautiful. So I am following that same kind of idea on the hat, adding all of my shadows away from her face. So going in again with those same cool gray markers. I really wanted to have a limited gray colors, black and gray color scheme for this instead of bringing in a ton of different tones. And I love this hat because you really get to emphasize all of those wrinkles and all of the texture of the fabric of that hat. I just think it's so fun. And I love leaving that little bit of a reflective light highlight on the back part where you don't bring your shadow so that it's touching that artist drawn line. You leave just a little bit of a gap. I think that just really helps to give that really rounded and full effect. So I use the same orange shades for that ribbon on her hat or the band on her hat, the same as I did for her little cloak. So bringing in that YR09 and then jumping to a YR68 to blend that out with my medium shade, and then a YR04 as my highlight. I've been really loving these three this year for all of my kind of oranges that aren't necessarily just pumpkins, and I love how this looks. And nothing screams Halloween to me like a good Halloween triadic color scheme. So of course I had to bring in a pop of green because green, orange, and purple are triadic, and they are Halloween to me. So for her skin tone, I did decide to use a Caucasian skin tone for her. So I went with my EO4, going in and really emphasizing kind of that cheek highlight, rounding out her face. I blended that out with my E13, then jumped to an E11, and I'll bring in a little bit of E00 for the very highlights of her face. I really wanted a strong contrast between the shadows and the highlights, kind of creating that dramatic shading from them being kind of moonlit. And then I changed things up. I didn't want a ton of dark and dark and dark and dark on this, so I decided to make her kind of a dirty blonde, an ashy blonde. So I went in with my E40 markers, starting with 47 and keeping that color right up against the brim edge of her hat, and then pulled that down a little bit further with the E44. Then we'll bring in the E43 and start really kind of filling in a lot of that space, keeping most of that up towards that top, like really filling that solidly in under the brim of her hat. And then the highlight shades towards the bottom will be E41. And I kind of just ran that over everything to make sure that it all kind of worked together. So then we'll use the coordinating dies to cut out these images. I'm just holding my dies in place with a little bit of washi tape so they don't slide around. Sometimes I get crazy and I think I can just run these through the die cut machine, but something always slips. So for my moon, now that my background is dry, I am going in with Distress Oxide and Antique Linen first, just creating kind of a halo around the outside of the moon and really softly filling that in. I didn't want the actual moon to be completely white and stark when I laid down this moon kind of crater stencil on top. So I'm going in with a much heavier hand over the stencil, really creating a lot of depth and kind of contrast. And I will do a layer of the antique linen and then switch brushes and also bring in just a little bit of that old paper, which is like a slightly more green version of antique linen. They work really well together, and I just think it creates a lot of interest really easily. So I took this Trick or Treat stamp from a Simon Says Stamp sentiment set that I have with coordinating dies, and I'm stamping that out with, I believe it's Spiced Marmalade oxide ink, and then cutting that out with a coordinating die as well. My pattern paper here is from a Honeybee Stamps paper pad. I'll put that down in the description below for you. I just really liked how the spider webs gave a little bit of interest, but not enough to take away from that beautiful night sky that we created. And I'm going to pop up all of my images and my sentiment with foam, just because this could be kind of flat with everything just in one layer. And I thought popping them up would just kind of help bring them to life and help kind of focus your eye on them even a little bit more. If for shipping reasons you don't like to add foam, obviously you can just attach them flat and that would be okay too. I cut my foam into teeny tiny little bits to add to the back of this sentiment, just trying to kind of not worry about covering the whole thing obviously, but adding enough that it kind of stood up nice and straight. And then the thing that to me really brings this whole card together and makes me smile are these little glow-in-the-dark stars, these little clay bits from This Calls for Confetti. I've used these a couple times. It never gets old. I just kind of sprinkled them around, and especially with our starry background in the regular light, you see them, but they aren't like the star of the show. But I'm going to show you in a second what they look like once they're charged and you turn the lights off. And every time I use these, seriously, it just makes me smile. I love these, and they have them in a couple different shapes. I'll make sure I link to them down in the description below for you. All the products will be down there today. But when I tell you that this glow, it just screams Halloween and fun to me. I mean, come on, look at that. Like seriously, look at that whole container just lit all the way up. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you guys for being patient with me. Last week was my first week off in 2 years from posting, but I'm back into my regular routine, and I will see you back here next week. I love you guys so much. I'll see you then, and until then, happy crafting.